Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Trail Talk Highpointing podcast. I'm your host, Lauren, and the Highpointer that we're speaking with today is Kathryn Bertine from Tucson, Arizona. Kathryn, welcome to the show.
Hi, Lauren. Thank you so much for having me. I love your podcast, so I'm honored to be a guest today.
Thank
Sorry
you.
about the
I'm so
helicopter
excited.
flying by.
Oh, that happens. I'm so excited that you're here, and this has been kind of a long time coming. So let's just get right into it. What got you started in the outdoors, and how'd you start highpointing?
Great question. I'll say that what got me started in the great outdoors was just the general love of being outside as a little kid. And then I grew up in the suburbs of New York, and my parents had a cabin in upstate New York. So going up to the woods, throughout all my childhood summers, and just playing around in the mountains and the streams and the lakes, that had such an impact on me as a kid. So I had no idea that the highpointing journey was just around the corner as I was growing up, but being outside was something I've always loved. And the Highpoint journey has two beginnings. The first one is in 1995. I was a sophomore in college, and back in the day, I was a figure skater, and there was a collegiate skating competition in the summer out in Colorado Springs. And I went out, and my dad was out there with me. And if you go to Colorado Springs, everybody talks about Pikes Peak. Pikes Peak this, Pikes Peak that. It's like what we thought was it's got to be the biggest mountain in Colorado. It must be the highest. Everything's named Pikes Peak. So my dad and I climbed Pikes Peak and, took pictures in front of the sign, and we're like, yeah, we did the highest mountain in Colorado. And on our way down, we actually hiked up and we hitchhiked down, and we were in the car, and a stranger said something like, no, Pikes Peak's not the highest mountain in Colorado, and said something like somewhere over, near Leadville. And that's all we knew at the time. And we're like, oh, it's not? Which piqued our curiosity of, well, what is the highest mountain in Colorado? And keep in mind, this is far before the internet and Google. So we went back to our hometown, Bronxville, New York, and went to the local bookstore and said, are there any books out there that will tell us what the highest mountain in each state is? And sure enough, they typed it into the old computer, and it was Paul Zumwalt's book, the 50 States Highpointing book, that popped up, and that had been written, as you know, in 1988, and so that was in all the bookstore computer systems. So we ordered that, which you had to do, and we ordered 2 copies, one for my dad, one for me. And we thought that was the coolest thing, that there was a book about what we thought was the highest mountain in each state. But of course, turned out that a lot of states don't have necessarily a mountain as the high point. And we were just totally intrigued. And it was so cool that this book was also a workshop. You could write down notes. It was almost, it was kind of a guiding tool that you could record all your notes in about each high point. So we just thought this was the coolest thing ever. And we learned that Mount Elbert is the high point of Colorado, and we would get back to that someday. But for us, being in New York, the highest, or our closest high point was Mount Marcy. But also where we lived, way south of Mount Marcy, we were close to the high points of New Jersey and Connecticut and Massachusetts. So these were quickly things that we decided we would do. So my dad and I probably did about, maybe 7 high points together back in the mid to late 90s. And then life happened as it does for college kids. I moved across the country and started grad school elsewhere. And my dad was in his career, and we kept saying, okay, we'll get back to it. We'll get back to it. So let's fast forward from 1995 and Pikes Peak to 2020. And my dad at this point had retired to Tucson, where I now live, and the pandemic set in. and there was very little that you could do once the pandemic pre-vaccine set in. Everything was closed down, but we thought, you know what, we can still go outside. And we pulled the Highpoint book off the shelf again.
Oh, fun.
Saying, okay, what can we do? And at this point, my dad was 83, and he said, listen, I can't do all those big states, those big mountains, but I can do these. And he drew a list of most of the southern high points that we have along the southern states. And we had this whole list ready to go. And we had a start date for June 2020. And very sad to say and unexpected to both of us, my father passed in May of 2020. And I was devastated. He was not just my dad, but just my best friend. So to carry this this grief and not know what to do with it, it didn't hit me immediately. But about 6 months later, I thought to myself, you know what? I'd like to finish this quest and to honor, my dad and myself. And it happened that my father was cremated, and I had ashes, and so I got a mini urn. They actually make tiny urns, and a travel urn, it's actually called. And I brought my dad along on the Highpoint journey of all the high points that remained, and was able to scatter a little bit of his ashes at all of the high points that he wasn't able to do in life.
That is so special.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope that listeners can hear that I'm smiling and happy as I say this. And, I just have the biggest smile on my face talking about this journey, which did indeed start as a way for me to deal with grief and to cope through loss. But it was also truly just such a testament of love. And, that's exactly why the journey brought me so much joy to be able to do this. And it did take 2 years. And going back to the fact that I started the Highpoint quest again in, say, October of 2020. So we were still pre-vaccine at that point. And I tried to get to the majority of those southern high points that my dad wanted to do. I did those solo. I did not bring anyone with me. I didn't want to subject anyone else to germs and viruses during that time. And then after the vaccine came out, I thought, okay, what might be nice is that I could actually bring people with me who were in some way connected to my dad, had memories of him, and that made it even more special, was to bring people along, hiking partners along, through people that had been in his life too. So that's the short story.
Wow. And it all started with Pikes Peak. That's so unique. That's so special too.
Oh, thank you, Lauren. Yeah. It feels good. I love talking about it. And, along the way, I didn't also know that there was a Highpointers club at the time. I went to research, okay, now that we finally have internet, so many years later from 1995,
right.
And I was able to look at sites like Peak Bagger and places where you could actually kind of get a list. But I did not find the Highpointers website, or even learn about the Highpointers social media pages, all of it, until my second to last Highpoint. So I didn't learn about it until 2022. And it hit me. I was like, oh, there are others like me out here, other weirdos seeking out the high point of each state. Although I did have an awareness that there were people who high pointed, as I'm sure many of you know, if you're out there and you encounter a hiker on something like Charles Mound, Illinois, people are.
There's one reason they're there. Yeah. Or when you get to the register.
Oh, totally. And actually I take that back. It dawned on me a little bit earlier, but it didn't sink in. I had definitely seen that people had written in registers like High Point 43, High Point
Oh
26,
yeah.
and it's like, oh,
Yeah.
people are keeping track, so it was kind of in my brain, like but I didn't have any idea there was an actual organization or a club. And then when I did find out, I was like, oh, there's something bigger here. There's a convention. Wait, there's a board
Yeah.
meeting? Hold on. Like, this is so cool. I have to be
Yeah.
part of this.
It's such a great community too.
It is. It is. It's just like every sport you might play growing up, or club you might belong to if you're a nature enthusiast, it really attracts the same kind of people that have that love of the outdoors. And that was so apparent at the very first convention that I went to, which was in 2022. What a wonderful group of people. And plenty of other quirky weirdos like me. But, everybody was pretty darn normal in the sense that they just wanted to be outside and go on a personal quest that was also a part of a kind of big family.
Yeah, I agree. It's a special group. And I think what I love about it most is that we're all, weird in our own way, but basically normal people who have normal lives. And, we have jobs. Some of us have families. But the one thing we find time for is to get outside and to get across the country. So sometimes people think like, oh, I would love to do that one day. Oh, but it's not possible. And then I talk to all these people that are like, we managed to do this road trip across the country or this road trip to the nearby state or something. People find a way to put this into their life because for a lot of people, it is a family bonding experience. I have talked to so many fathers who bring their kids along, moms who bring their kids along, people that do it as a family or their siblings or something. There are a lot of people that pass this down to other generations. And it is so cool. I hope to do that.
Absolutely.
It is just such a connecting activity that just brings together a lot of great people. And we all say the same thing. I just love seeing the country, and I went to all these places I never knew, or I would have never gone to before. Like I grew up in Illinois, and I didn't leave Illinois until I was in college. I had never been to Charles Mound till I started highpointing. And I'm like, I had no idea.
No,
it was out there.
Like, why? Yeah. How else would you know about this private property farm that happens to be kind of tall vertically?
Right. Because all of the places in Illinois where you would go to for like natural attractions are like the Shawnee National Forest or Starved Rock State Park, but you wouldn't think about Charles Mound. And so it really takes you maybe for some people out of their comfort zone. I'm not saying that Charles Mound is out of anyone's comfort zone.
Right.
But you know what I mean? For other state high points, it's a good way to test your limits.
I couldn't agree more. I loved that element probably most of all was just the exploration, driving across country, or I did it in kind of cluster trips, as I call them, and I'm sure many high pointers do as well. Like, where can you go and then, get a whole bunch of high points in one trip, and
yes.
And for me, that was so much fun. And every now and then you might read social media posts where someone will say like, oh, wow, that one was hard to get to, or that high point was boring. And I always think like, I don't think they get the big picture.
Right. I have the same sentiment when I read things like that. And also when people say that about national parks, because there's an implication in that comment that this piece of land or this structure owes you a good time.
Right.
And it doesn't. The reason it's preserved is actually to protect it from us.
Yeah. Yes. yes, exactly. And so sorry, it didn't have the view that you were envisioning or desired. It's like, hold on, you're missing the entire outlook of how lucky we are to have, yes, of course, national parks, but also how unique and interesting that a sidewalk in Delaware that has had this high point. And I love the fact that it's had to be cut out of the sidewalk a few times. because it's been paved over. Like these are such touching, endearing stories that make something so unique. And I think it's all about embracing how unique and different and special it is that monument or marker is there at all.
Yes.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's,
People,
yeah. Yeah. I would
there are
say
enough
most
people that
people,
care
yeah.
about it.
Yeah, exactly. There are people that made that happen.
Yeah.
And I think that's beautiful and wonderful. And I think that far more people say wonderful, positive things than the occasional outlier who, might think something is not special or boring. And as long as we kind of keep illuminating the fact of how special it is, I think high pointing is going to survive in a very positive way.
Yeah, I agree. And I also appreciate the humor of when it snowed in Florida and then people put on their mountaineering gear at the Florida State High Point and they're like, I braved the weather to summit Britton Hill.
So
it's like, that's cute. I mean, it's funny. It's like we can all have a good time. I love it. So what was your first high point? Was it Mount Marcy?
Marcy was the first official high point.
Okay.
And then let's see, High Point, New Jersey was the next one. Oh, and then we have a fun story. When my dad and I did the High Point of Connecticut back in, I have it in my notes, but it was probably 97, I'll say. And we were, of course, following Paul Zumwalt's book, and the high point back then was Bear Mountain. That was the registered, and now it's Mount Frissell. Or Frissell. I think it's Frissell is pronounced.
I've heard it both ways.
Okay, Frissell is now the official high point, but Bear Mountain was when we did it. And I actually didn't discover that until I started working on the book about this journey. And I was going through my notes and writing things down and making sure I had all the accurate elevations. And I typed in, High Point of Connecticut, and Google returns Mount Frissell. And I'm like, no, that's wrong. That's wrong. They're like, oh, hold on a minute. It's now right. And I wrote to Terry Bird at the High Pointers Foundation, or the High Pointers Club. And I said, if we did the high point at this date, do I need to go back? And, yeah. And he said, it counts. If you did the high point when it was still, and he said, listen, I count that high point for anyone who did it back in the day when it was, and there are 5 different states that have had a shifting high point. So,
is North Carolina one of them? Was it Grandfather Mountain?
I have to check. I have these written down. I don't know off the top of my head, but I think it might have been. Well, at least way back in the day, Mount Mitchell of North Carolina definitely was, and then it started the whole back and forth with Elijah Mitchell which one is the highest. So I know way back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, there was a different high point. But I also don't know if it was even sooner than that. So the history is fantastic. And that was part of what also inspired me. I'm like, this journey that I started to celebrate my dad now has taken on a new, I won't say twist necessarily, but a new layer of how fascinating the history of some of these high points really is and how interesting the people are. And that's when it hit me, about a year into this journey. I'm like, I think there's more here than I thought there would be. I think there's a book. And, I never started this journey to write a book about it. It was a personal journey. And then about halfway into that, I'm like, I think maybe I will write about this. There's a lot more than just this story of my father and me. So I'm working on that now as we speak.
Oh, that's so great. And that's another great thing about the High Pointers Club is we have so many great resources. Yes. I had Patty Maniscala on the show recently, and then Skymar Thaler, he does the Rooftops of America YouTube channel. And we just have so many people who are such a great wealth of knowledge about the history. And then there are a couple of, geography and geology people that have been on the show. I know we all love lists, I found, the High Pointers. And some people get into the weeds with their lists. And I've had people on the show who have done like the second high points or like the former high points list.
Oh,
So what you're
nice.
saying, yeah, like they'll do, if they're in a state, they'll do that high point and then the former high point. I mean, you could just, it's just never ending.
It's
It's
never
like the
ending.
7 summits, and then there's the 7 second summits, and then there's the volcanoes, and
And the counties, the county high
oh, the
point,
county high pointers.
and
Yeah.
then the tri points, like where,
Yes.
I
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
you could totally go down like almost a lifelong rabbit hole of checking off all of these lists.
I know. And it's so fun.
Yeah,
Because
abs-
sometimes when I ask the 50 state high pointers, and I'll ask you this at some point during this episode, I'm always like, what's next? Nobody ever goes, I don't know.
right.
They all have something they're going to do.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree. Do I answer that now or do we wait for the end?
We can do that, actually. So you are a 50 state high pointer, and we'll talk about Denali. But since I brought it up, what is next?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So the first thing that's next is I am going back to Denali, but not as a list, not starting I'm just going to do these all again. Though there are some people who do that. I'm going back to Denali for a specific reason we can jump into. But in terms of the what's next, I'm always open to things like the 7 territories. Some of them are a lot more convenient than others, so that's not necessarily a list. I don't know if I'm going to go all the way to Samoa and some of those outlying islands, but
Yeah.
Puerto Rico is something I'd love to do. So
Yeah.
that's a minor side list, but that's not even a whole list. I would say what I'm doing now and what I've fallen in love with is section hiking the Arizona Trail.
Oh, that's amazing.
Oh, I'm sure when
Wow.
you lived here, you've known about. I bet you even did some hikes on it.
Yeah. Well, I didn't hike the whole thing, but I love researching it. Patty talked about it a lot when she was on the show. I've watched every documentary I could find on YouTube about it, and that's a goal to do it. I think I'd have to section hike it, but
Oh, for sure. Well, Patty
yeah.
did the whole thing. She did
She
it.
did.
She did
Yeah.
it as a through hike. And for those listening, the Arizona Trail is an 800-mile trail that starts at the border of Mexico and Arizona and goes to the top border of Arizona and Utah. And the trail meanders and winds its way, from border to border. And where I live in Tucson, we are like a day trip driving easy to what's called the southern section. There's the southern, central, and northern section. And within the southern section, I can get to those 15 different trailheads within at most a couple-hour drive, even less. And you can go and hike, maybe a 14-mile stretch as a day hike. Or if you wanted to do a camping trip, there are plenty of 22-mile stretches. You could do that in 2 days or the whole day, whatever your preference is. But I love it. And this is one of these lists I'd like to do over time with no rushed desire to complete this. I'm loving it. So I'm happy to drag it out as long as possible.
That's fantastic. So where are you in the trail?
Let's see, we have done 10 of the 15 southern sections, or I could even put it more blankly, we've done 10 of the 44 total sections.
Okay.
I got to add up the miles, but no, I don't think we've even quite done 200 miles yet.
Okay.
I'm going to have to go check.
A lot.
But I'm loving it. It's so great.
I mean, Arizona is so diverse. What you'll see, as you go further north is amazing. And I think that Patty saw, I don't know if it was while she was on the Arizona Trail or while she was just hiking, but she did see a mountain lion in Arizona.
So cool.
I know, cool, but also my biggest fear in life.
Oh, totally, right? I've not yet seen one in the wild. And I mean, I think the majority of mountain lions really want to leave people alone. Of course, that would depend on their hunger level, but let's say they're well sated and quite full. I'm hoping. I'd love to see one.
Yeah.
As I say, sitting on my patio. Oh, yeah.
Right. Well, I've heard stories from people in Tucson of mountain lions going into their backyard if they have like a fountain or a pool just for some water.
Yep, we've got a fountain and a pool right over there, and I will keep an eye out, especially now as we get into spring and there are a lot more sightings.
So let's talk about Denali. Can you talk about your first summit and then your plans to go back?
Yes, I did my first summit in 2022. That
Hmm.
was my second to last high point. My last one was Montana, and it went Denali, Montana. And many people know that Denali's got a pretty short window
Hmm.
of climbability. Roughly mid-May to mid-July. That's the 2-month window to do Denali. So that came first for me, and
Yeah.
then finally Montana as my last final two. But I went, and I will be honest, yet also uh, polite that of all the guided trips that I've done, I did not enjoy the guiding company that I went with
Okay.
on Denali. I enjoyed the fellow clients and the hikers, the climbers. They were great. We're a mixed bunch from all across the globe, and I really enjoyed that. I found the guiding company that I was with on that was very bro culture, if I use
Okay.
that term
Yeah.
correctly. Just and I want to backtrack a moment to say that all the guiding trips that I've done, for Gannett and Granite, Hood, Rainier, great guides, great men. I mean, it's predominantly men, most of
Hmm.
these tour guides. And I mean, they've been fantastic and wonderful
Hmm.
and just great people. So it really shocked me when I got to Denali with this group, and that just bro culture vibe and a little bit of a condescendingness toward the women on the trip. And I thought that was odd. So I did it. We did that trip together, and I'll spare all details.
What were there other women clients?
There were 3 women, 3 men
Okay.
on this trip, and
Can you tell me the company name? I won't put it out in the
yes, no,
chat.
I'm happy to share it for sure.
Oh,
And
okay. Okay.
yeah, no, feel free to include it because I think transparency is key. I went with
Yep.
Mountain Trip, and
Oh,
I
okay.
did
Okay.
not enjoy the vibe of Mountain
Yeah.
Trip.
I mean, there are some guides that are only doing it because they need a way to make money so that they can, do the things they love in the mountains.
Yeah.
And then there are others that are like, no, I have the skill set and I want to give people a good experience and keep them safe. And
Yes.
and
Yeah.
some of the former, they tend to be probably younger, I would imagine.
Yeah. Let's talk about that because the guides that we had 2 lead guides that were in their mid-20s, mid to upper 20s,
Okay.
and 2 training guides. And one of those guides was also in his mid-20s. The guide that I liked the most was a training guide who was 40, 41. And
Hmm.
I just feel like that guy had a lot more life experience
Sure.
and just was more pleasant to be around
Yeah.
and nice. And while I will say that the guides at Mountain Trip did have the knowledgeable skills on the
Mhm.
mountain. Like I didn't ever feel in danger, like I was falling off a cliff ridge. It wasn't like they had the skill set.
Mhm.
But I do think it's important on any guided trip to have a good camaraderie and a good um, uh, kind of team atmosphere. And that
Oh,
was
for sure,
totally
it's a team.
lacking.
I mean, when you're roped in, you're a
Oh,
team.
when you're roped in, you're roped in. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just um, just to keep it, clean and simple, just the the way that they treated the women were kind of second class.
Oh, well.
And I'd heard stories like this. I've heard that, mountaineering is a man's world, but I'd never experienced it because I loved all the guiding companies I went with on the other
Yeah.
mountains, and I just never experienced that. So it was a really bizarre thing to be like, maybe this is just the Denali way. I don't know. And so it wasn't enjoyable. I did talk to the company about it and made sure that they understood, like, it's really not cool, especially with how many women that climb Denali these days. And I love talking about this fact. Back in, it was only as recent as 1970, that's 55 years ago, that the first women's team was allowed to attempt Denali. And they did summit. And it's an incredible story. You can read about it in Arlene Blum's Breaking Trail. And then there's a brand new book out now by Cassidy Randall called 30 Below. And both of them tell the same story of this women's team who summited in 1970. and one as a memoir, one as a, reporting journalism. And they're great books, so I highly recommend them. But to think that just as recent as 1970, women weren't even allowed on Denali, unless they were cooks at base camp.
Wow. Were they not allowed to climb as a team, as a formal team, or were they not allowed on the mountain at all?
They were allowed on the mountain as far as base camp, which is, like when you fly onto the mountain, like that's base camp, the first one right there. And I guess women had been allowed to accompany their climbing husbands, but they had to stay there and maybe cook a meal, but they couldn't keep going. They couldn't keep progressing. And then, of course, as many people know, you do have to apply for a permit to go onto Denali. And, with a guided group, or even for people who do the solo mission, you got to get a permit. And they weren't giving permits to any women's team. So the trail breakers, those who broke trail for the women, were this amazing group in the 1970s. And they were all very accomplished mountaineers who had done incredible climbs on other mountains, but usually the same way. Like they had to go with a group of men, who were, who would take them. And even that was hard to do. Like to get guys to take a woman on a trip was very challenging back then. But these women had plenty of mountaineering experiences on huge peaks around the world. And so they banded together to say, okay, well, let's do a women's group up Denali. And they were able to get a permit. And the story is incredible. So again, you've got to check out both Breaking Trail by Arlene Bloom and 30 Below by Cassidy Randall, and great stories. And there are a lot of twists and turns. And I kind of gave away that they summited, but they almost did not. And it's an incredible story to read.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. I'll have to check that out. That's really interesting.
So I guess this then brings us to why I'm going back. So here we are now, 2025. And I am going back to Denali because A, that was the hardest mountain I've ever climbed, and I want to try it again. And B, I'm going back with a women's expedition. And Alaska Mountaineering School, which is one of the accredited guiding groups, very, very fantastic group. I've loved every interaction with them. They are putting out an all-women's expedition, and we individually had to apply, and have an interview and be chosen to go on this expedition. So I feel honored that I was selected for this, and we will have 6 climbers and 3 female guides, all of us women. So we are going up this summer, and AMS did this last year for the first the first time to see, like, is this sustainable? Are there women who want to do this? And sure enough, there are. And finally, the stat is rising, which had been as low as only 10 to 12 women were even, sorry, let me restate that. There was a statistic that was in place for a long time that roughly 10 to 12% of the climbers who attempted Denali were women. Only 10 to 12%. And not summiting, even just attempting the summit. So that has grown now. I've been told it's now about 18%, but that's still way too low. I think the hope is it should be 50%, the way that most mountains and trails are that we have. Trails should be open and accessible to anybody who has the training and fitness to take something on like that. So I love that we are going back, 55 years later, a team of women to hopefully, if the weather gods are kind, to stand on the summit. And I can tell you right now that we've had plenty of interactions with the women and the guides who are leading this trip, and everybody is putting in the work and is physically capable of doing this climb. So
sure.
If we don't summit, it's only going to be due to weather, not due to the training or the fact that we're female.
Yeah. So have any of the women going on this climb, have they summited before like you have?
The guides have.
Sure.
The guides have. But the women, You know what? I take that back. I know there's one woman who has been on Denali before. What I don't know is if she was on a group that summited or a training group. There are some training groups that go to Denali to work on skills, but might not be a group that intends to summit. So that's the info I have on that. But all three guides have been on and up Denali.
Wow. You know, I think another barrier that I've heard about is finances.
Oh, for sure.
And the time off of work. Mm-hmm. It's like, it is so difficult to do. It's like you're almost better off doing it when you're younger than a lot of people save it for last. But at the same time, you might, when you're older, have the money and probably saved up enough time where you can take, 30 days off of work or something like that. But Denali, I think, is a special case for, that specific barrier.
I agree. And it's a really important point that you bring up, because I think, people, much like yourself, you've got a toddler right now. And of course, just like anyone, you're fully capable of training and going for Denali, but you also have a really young kid at home right now. Mm-hmm. And you have a career, you have a job. I work from home. I don't have young children to care for at this time. So my window is a lot more flexible to do this right now. But when we talk about the finance part, it's expensive. And for those who've researched Denali, they know that. And if you haven't, this starting price to go with a guided group, which you have to really, is, that's $12,500 at a minimum. And then you have to add in everything else, like the gear for Denali is expensive.
And it's different than the gear from, any other peak you would do probably in the lower 48
in season. It's even different from the gear that you would bring to Rainier or any of the other glacier mountains that are at 14,000 feet. Like, you need a whole different level of warmth and gear for the 20,000 foot.
Even
summit.
If you're just renting it too, I would imagine it's still more expensive than renting gear on Rainier.
Oh, totally. I mean, my saving grace was used eBay stuff.
Oh yeah. Okay, I didn't think of that.
Which is really, really helpful. Especially for things like boots and sleeping bags. I think there are a fair amount of climbers who might do Denali as check the box,
and then they sell it after.
And then they sell it after. So, hey, pro tip to all those who are listening, a lot, I bought a great pair of triple boots, which is what you need up there, the warmest boot that you can get. Those things retail for like $1,200 new. And I was able to find one that had been worn once. Or I should say, I've been able to find a pair, not just one boot. That's important to know. To find a pair of boots that had been worn once, and they were selling for $400. Now, that's a heck of a lot better than $1,200, but it's still very expensive. So, it takes a long time to save up the funds that you might need to do this. And, I remember one of the women on our trip had kind of put in the chat that we have about our Denali team has a chat, and she very honestly asked, like, how are you guys affording this? And we were all like, hey, some of us have saved for a lot of years. Like, this is our vacation plan for the year. Right. This is all of our vacation budget is going to this. And others are like, I'm putting this on my credit card and it's worth the debt that it might incur. So there are so many different philosophies, and it's true that no matter where you are on the wealth spectrum, that's an expensive trip to plunk down a lot of money for, and you're not guaranteed that you're going to summit.
Right. I think that's another fear that people have. It's like, what if I don't summit, and then all that money? Although you get the experience, but what I see is like you're paying for qualified guides. And you're paying for your safety and the experience of other people.
Absolutely. For me, that was, I remember thinking when you land at base camp and you have this incredible view and it's only going to get better and better and better as you climb. flying in and landing on that glacier was worth it, was worth the expense alone.
Wow, really?
It was, and
Cool.
it didn't hit me until I was on the plane and seeing, I'm like, wow, this is worth the whole thing. And then, as long as we can control our controllables, which is making sure we have the form and the fitness, then to me, that's also worth it. The things that you can't prepare for, like if you were to get sick on the mountain, or if you were to get injured, you only have so much control over that part, and you have to make peace with that. Is it still going to be worth it? And then, of course, the summit, which is, again, it's 50%. If you were to be plagued by bad weather and your team had to turn around, you just have to embrace that at the start and say, is it worth it to put down this much money to see how high we can get? And I think if you subscribe to the views and the experience of what you're about to undertake, I do think it's worth the money. And I think, yeah, I mean, and for me, it was absolutely expensive. I don't have that amount as just disposable income. So even, and knowing that too, so if I'm coming to you saying that Denali was worth it, not just once, but I'm going to go back twice,
Yeah.
it's been worth it both times. But yeah, you just make cuts elsewhere.
Right. I guess if it's a priority, you make time or whatever resources needed for it. I don't know why I just thought of this, but when we were talking about the people that look at, not a very high point or a less popular national park, and they're like, I didn't do it. Those might be the same people that are like, well, if I can't get to the summit, then why go?
I agree. I totally agree. Maybe that's like a good checkpoint. Like if you think the Delaware sidewalk high point is boring, then I don't think you're ready for Denali.
Yeah, maybe when you're like interviewing for the team, maybe just throw that question out there. Like, what did you think of Britton Hill? Or do you know
that? Love that. Oh my gosh.
Or Congaree National Park. What did you think of that?
Exactly. Britton Hill was one of my first high points on the second quest of doing it. And I thought that was just such a beautiful park that they built.
Yeah.
And I love that you had options of which trail you wanted to take back there too, in that beautiful walk. Like, I thought that was just wonderful. And, if anyone just thinks it's, out of the way or hard to get to, or, that's it, I'm like, oh no, you're not getting the whole journey.
Right. Well, and then there's also this element of like, what did you expect? Because there's a certain amount of research that you have to do before you go to these high points. At least you have to, find it on a map or something like that. And if you know how to read a topographic map, you're going to see there's not a lot of close circles.
Right.
It's pretty flat, and you got to expect that going in. And also it's Florida, and it's like, you have to know. And that's why I like all these resources that we have in the High Pointers Club. You have the Rooftops of America YouTube channel. You have Patty's contributions to the High Pointers Club magazine, A to Z, where she talks about the history of all these high points. And it's like, if you don't know what you're getting into, there are so many resources, or the books, that you mentioned. A lot of the podcast guests have gotten those books when they got into high pointing in the 80s and 90s. There are so many resources that you are rarely going into each high point without knowing anything. Of course, there's a podcast too, and you can hear about everyone's experiences.
And it's so great too. And I think there's room on the shelf for more books, for more video content, for more, just anything that gets people excited about going into nature and finding high points. It's great. And I love that Patty is working on this book, compiled much of what she's done for the magazine, of giving us the history of each high point. It's so important that we know that and some of these mountains and parks and trails just have really cool history. It's great to know about where you're treading. I mean, who knew that Woodall Mountain in Mississippi, like that served as a sighting point for Civil War battles. Like, I think that's interesting. I'm a history nerd, and really, really cool stuff. And My book will dive into some of the history of some of the high points, as well as talking about the personal journey. And the great part is all these books are valuable and important to put out there. So we can just keep preserving the high points.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to your book.
Thank you.
I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent. We'll circle back to Denali because I do want to hear about your first summit. But I've often talked about the Instagram culture that has come into high points and parks and trails and stuff, where it's like everybody expects this like short clip of this phenomenal mountain or any scenery. And it's like if you don't get that, that might disappoint a certain generation that might be all they know. That's like their window to the world. Mm-hmm. And I think it's like a generational thing.
To have that visual medium to be able to say, this is high pointing. It's so interesting for sure. I think, what you had just stated, it reminds me of, I just saw like a Facebook post on the High Point page, which is a guy who went back to a high point because he said, I forgot to take a selfie here. At the summit, and it made me think like, okay, if that's important to him, okay, that's fine, but it's also okay not to take a selfie or not to take a picture of the marker. If you want to take a picture of it, great, because it's great if you have a personal record of being there. That's important. That's wonderful. But don't forget to enjoy your time there, or your journey to the high point is just as important. And I'm sure Lauren, too, there are some high points where you might be on a trail and you're just kind of in a tunnel of trees and you don't see a whole lot of views. Or maybe the high point itself doesn't have a view because it's surrounded by trees, and you can absolutely make that a beautiful picture. Find an interesting angle and celebrate that. Or maybe I'm just an old school thinker. If you don't take a photo there, it's still okay. It doesn't always have to happen, or it doesn't have to be at the summit. You can document it however you choose, whatever way gives you joy.
Yes, I agree. And I often, wonder when I'm at these places, scenic places or just significant places, and I see other people there, I'm like, would any of us be here? I know what my answer is, but would any of us be here if you couldn't bring a camera? I know. Or like, what would you do anything differently if you couldn't show the rest of the world? I don't know, that popped in my mind because I entered the lottery for the Synchronous Fireflies event at Congaree National Park. Of course I lost, because that's what I do. I lose those lotteries. It's an activity that I apparently love.
Your day will come.
I don't think it will. I lost that. I wanted to take my daughter to the White House Easter egg roll. We lost that one too. And I entered like all of the random times, the 7 a.m. time, like who's going to do that? Lost that. Yeah. But anyway, you can't bring your cell phone to that event, obviously, because that light would disturb the event.
Yes. Yeah.
So I thought, my chances are better because, that's going to eliminate a lot of people.
Yeah.
But I still lost.
Oh my gosh. I'm thinking it brings up this memory when my dad and I hiked Mount Marcy, our first official high point. This was way before cell phones and definitely before selfies. But we hiked with, do you remember disposable cameras that Kodak would make? So like a, quick camera you can bring with you, take pictures, and then it's just like one roll of film, and then you bring that to get developed.
That little thing.
The little, little wheel you have to use to wind it to the next, the next shoot. So my dad and I have a picture of each of us. It wasn't even at the summit. most likely because I think the summit that day was pretty cloudy, so there really was no actual view. But we did have a view from one of the footbridges along the way. And so he took a picture of me and I took a picture of him. And that was our photo documentation of Mount Marcy.
Yeah.
And I love it. I'm like, well, that's how you did it back then. I also love the record that we're both in like shorts and cotton t-shirts and absolutely zero tech gear. And,
right.
You know, a backpack that was just, you know, not quite as, it doesn't measure up to the backpacks we have today, you know?
Yeah.
But,
you know, I just said I didn't want to go off on a tangent, but I do listen to a lot of outdoor podcasts, and I was listening to the most recent outside podcast. It's the podcast for Outside Magazine.
Yeah.
And this guy was talking about how he was in Vermont or New Hampshire, and he's maybe a Colorado guy or something out there. And he's like, I had all my gear. I had all the right brands and materials, and I looked the part. And then he said he met a local who was in like a cotton or, you know, maybe a flannel shirt and just like jeans, and they were on the same trail and they ended up helping him.
Oh my gosh.
Because they were talking, I think the theme was like East Coast versus like, you know, West Mountains, the hikers and like the differences between them.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. Oh, it's so true. Yeah. It's like you can get all the great gear that they have out there, but you better still be prepared.
Right. Yeah. And it doesn't replace, you know, having good intuition and just hard skills.
Exactly. Skills and intuition. Yep. Mm-hmm. And water. Don't forget your water.
Yeah. We'll get back to Denali now. So can you talk about that experience, your first time summiting?
You know what? Yes, but I even want to save that question, Lauren, a little bit. I'd love to talk to you after the second Denali trip and almost have a summit experience comparison. So if it's okay with you, I want to come back to that to give the full story of Summit 1, Summit 2, because I can assure you right now that the experiences will be very different because of the guide culture. So I'd love to put a bookmark in that.
I want the story because I love women's climbs. I've been on one. Yeah. And I just want to hear it.
Oh, perfect. Okay, good. Mm-hmm. I can't wait. So we're putting a bookmark in that. We're coming back to that. But I'm curious, tell me which mountain did you do? What climb did you do as an all-women's group?
Rainier. I went with
nice.
IMG. It was a great experience. And it came at a really interesting time because I am an Army veteran and I had just deployed to Iraq. And so this was like 2021. And I came back and like I was gone for like 8 or 9 months. And I don't know what it is, but when you come back from something like that, and I wasn't in like the surge or anything, and there weren't bullets flying and all that. It wasn't one of those deployments. It was pretty soft, I guess, compared to other experiences that other people have had. But when I came back, I was just like, I got to get out. I got to do stuff. And so I had an opportunity to get a spot on a women's team. And I took it, and there were other female veterans on that team, military veterans. A lot of them were in the reserves or the National Guard, but they were all from the Pacific Northwest. So I'm coming out there from North Carolina, and I'm like, hey guys, did a lot of Stairmaster training. And I'm not in like Asheville or the Appalachian region. I'm in central North Carolina, just south of Raleigh. So I did the most training I could do, but I did Summit, and it was a great experience. And yeah, all females, you know, guides, teammates, everything. And the energy was so refreshing because I was coming from like, I guess like a very bro heavy environment, and I didn't know how used to it I had become until I was on the all female team. I'm like, oh, okay, this is really nice. And they were so patient with all of us, you know, in teaching us glacier skills and all that on day 2. And then some people did have to be turned around, and they went back to Camp Muir at 10,000 feet. We summited, we came back down, and they were all just like high-fiving us, even though they didn't have the same experience. And I was like, this is so unique. This is a very special group of people that are genuinely happy. They got turned around, but they were so happy for us that we summited. It was just such a supportive group of people. And that was my first, I had hiked Mount Mitchell before. I didn't know what high pointing was. I'm just like, this is one of the state parks in North Carolina, and I'm visiting all the state parks. And I got into high pointing after that. But I had climbed Mount Rainier, not to do the Washington State high point, but just because it's Mount Rainier. And then later I'm like, oh, well, I guess that counts because I'm a high pointer.
Yes.
But so it was really my first like guided experience. And now looking back, I'm like, I can't really imagine doing that co-ed,
Interesting.
Because it really set the standard.
For sure. For sure. And it's so interesting too, how like I've been fortunate that any co-ed group I was on just had fantastic people. Mm-hmm. But as you know, it just, one bad apple can make the whole journey not feel great.
And and I'm sure that can happen on women's teams too.
It could. It definitely, it's possible. And I think there's something really about kind of, I love that story that you just shared about the women being supportive of other women. And I think finally we're turning that corner more and more in society where women will lift and applaud other women rather than, push them down. I mean, yes, it can still happen, but there was a time I know, for me growing up, I still was, of a generation, or at least my parents' generation, that was more something where you would see women being pitted against other women. Mm-hmm. And, almost trying to like instill catfighting, so to speak. And I think our generation is getting a lot better at breaking that down. But it's also a conscious choice. If you see a woman who is succeeding, or you're a woman who summits, or whether you summit or you don't summit, you have the ability to applaud those who do. Yeah. That's a choice that a woman, has to make, or a person has to make. And when we empower women to do that and to say like, I'm so happy for you, Mm-hmm. I might be bummed if I can't summit, but I'm so happy for you. It's a great thing to know that we're part of a generation that is changing that for the better.
Yes. Yeah. It says a lot about their character. And, we got to know each other throughout the climb. So even before they like applauded us when we came down, I knew that they were good people. Mm-hmm. But it's like one of those things when somebody does that, it's like, I don't know much about you, but I know that you're probably very honest and genuine in everything you do in life, because that is really hard to genuinely be happy for. And again, it's not as expensive as Denali, but still, we all poured resources into this, and to have it, and it was like the only perfect day throughout that week. It was just like, it was so beautiful. And to just have that window and not be able to do it, but still applaud others who could, that's just, you're just such a good person. And I left Washington. It was my first time in Washington. I'm like, oh, these people are great.
That's a good feeling.
I had such a great time, and all the guides were very competent. I never ever felt like, oh, I don't know how this is going to go. We have a woman leading us. I never felt that.
No.
They were all, I remember like when we had our meeting and I asked the guides, just out of curiosity, I'm like, how many times have you summited Rainier? Not in a like, I'm going to judge you for this answer kind of way, but they were like, oh, I think this will be my 60th time up there or something like that. So I'm like, wow, like we are in such good hands.
Yes.
And I think that there were a lot of moments where, looking back, I'm like, they probably should have gotten a little frustrated at us. Mm-hmm. But they were so patient and so knowledgeable. And they had that instinct because they had been up that mountain, close to 60 times. They knew what the mountain was going to do before it did it.
Yes. Yeah. And that's so, so important. Oh, yeah. I love that. You're right. It should always be experience based too. Like for whatever gender, as long as that guide has been up and down that mountain a number of times, that's great. But when you hear women saying like, oh yeah, like 60 times, you're like, well, that's so fantastic. Right. Women guides that are assembled into a women's only team probably have to have more climbing experience than their male counterparts, because that culture still exists where for us to be considered pretty good, we have to actually be above expert level.
I know.
And I laugh because it's sad that it's still out there. But, that whole saying, oh, you're pretty good for a girl. That still exists for women today, where we know we have to be great to be considered good. And hopefully by the time your daughter is a grown up, that stereotype is eliminated. And it's better now, but it definitely still exists. One thing I forgot to mention about my first Denali experience is that I brought a female Army veteran with me on this trip. And I did that by, I paid for my own trip, but then I fundraised to have her trip covered. And the reason that I did that, as I mentioned to you, I was always trying to find a way to connect each mountain with my father in some way. But then when we got to Denali, I remember thinking like, okay, I'm not seeing a connection in terms of, I don't know people my dad knew who I can just say, hey, plunk down a whole lot of money and come to Denali with me. Or, I wasn't forming something that worked in my head. And then it hit me that my dad had been very involved with Wounded Warriors and founding a chapter where he was bringing Wounded Warriors to the Adirondacks in upstate New York to go on fishing and hiking and camping trips. And when I remembered this, I was like, okay, here's what I could do. I could bring a, whether wounded or a veteran, and as you know, wounds aren't always physical. There's also PTSD, and that is very much a wound. So I was happy to find a female veteran specifically, because A, I wanted to feel comfortable sharing a tent with someone, and B, I think my dad would have loved that too, because for what you have done and how you have served our country, and I'm saying that to you, Lauren, and to all the women in the military, I just have so much honor and respect for what you do. And so it was natural for me to want to find a woman to take to Denali. And sure enough, once I built a fundraising platform for her, wondering like, okay, are we going to be able to raise about, $10,000? I put in some of my own money, but can we raise $10,000? And I was able to raise it in 48 hours. Because that many people out there, and not all people I know, like strangers too, saying, yes, I want to be part of helping a female veteran get to Denali. And we did it, and we raised it, and she came with me, and we had an amazing experience together. So that's a happy story that I love sharing about Denali 1.
That's great.
Isn't that a good, it's, cool. It just gave me a lot of joy, gave her a lot of joy. And that's all that mattered to me most, was that she enjoyed that journey.
I'm sure it was very confidence building too.
Yeah, for sure. And I will share this about, I also want to share this about a snippet of, we were talking about how I kind of had the bro culture guiding experience.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things about that trip, and I went to this trip for Denali very fit and ready. It was quickly noticed within our team how the guides really wanted to move as fast as they could, which is funny with Denali because it's not a mountain known for speed. You're carrying heavy loads, and it's usually taking a long time. And on summit day, it was very apparent that our guides wanted to go as fast as possible. They were like, we're going to be the first team up the mountain. We're going to get there. We want we want dibs on first. And I remember thinking like, oh, all right, if that's really your goal, but the whole speed thing was an interesting aspect of it. And here's where I'm going with this story. On the descent, as our team was coming down Denali, was the very sad news that a different group had a man who passed from a heart attack. on the final summit day. So not our group, but it was so sad to hear. And eventually we learned that this was an underlying medical condition, not something necessarily that happened, you know, because of that particular day or anything done within the team. But but he had a heart attack and he passed, and he was 48 years old, which was and at the time when I did, I was 47, so we didn't learn these details later, but it really hit that was that death can and does happen on Denali. So where I'm going with this story is that as our team was descending the summit, we waited, probably 4 hours as the helicopter rescue came in to move the man who passed. And I remember thinking, we're seeing this unfold and listening on the radio as this unfolds too, like the camp radio. That like, okay, so it's any speed attempt or speed record, like that's obviously, that flies out the window. That was an extra 4 hours of waiting for something that was very life circumstances oriented. And I just remember thinking like, forget all those dumb things like, oh, I want to do it in this time, I need to do it in that time. And remember the big picture of how fortunate we are to have our health, to do what our bodies are capable of doing. And to remember that we're lucky. We're lucky to be on that mountain doing what we're doing. And that really stuck with me as something that was very poignant in so many ways. And also kind of like, take that, guides. I mean, let's have a perspective shift of what matters. And is speed really the most important?
Right. For like a commercial client.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not like National Geographic documentary for an FKT here.
No, exactly. And I mean, there are FKT folks who want to go out there and do the fastest known attempt.
But they make that known.
Oh, for sure. And do that, or hire your private guide if you want to run the darn thing. It's possible. But the rest of us were very, very fit and in shape people, obviously capable of doing that climb. But we weren't going for the summit record that day. And then, nature and life circumstances showed us what really truly matters, or at least me. I hope the guides also absorbed that knowledge that day.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's like an arrogance that comes with being in your 20s that we've all gone through that. Of like, it can't happen to me, or like I'm invincible, and then until you see something or experience something. So I hope that had that effect on them.
I hope so too. And I did an inventory of how old were we, the clients on that trip, and of that group, it's six, a team of six. 4 out of the 6 were in their 40s, and 2 were in their mid to late 30s. Okay. So, which that's also a typical group on Denali as clients. Because just for what you brought up earlier, we might have a little bit more in our savings account as we get older, or we might have the ability to take time off work or find babysitters for non-infant children, so like there's definitely a big group of people who attempt Denali in their mid to late 30s and upward, and those demographics
that's good
matter.
to hear.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I turn 40 next year, so.
You got so much time. You're just a youngin'.
That is good to hear, and well, I'll get to the question later. But you always hear about on these documentaries that we all watch, when somebody experiences the death of somebody that they were climbing with or something like that. It's always a very like moment where you pause in life and you're like, all right, what do we do? What matters here?
Right.
Speed, summit, no. Getting down, yes.
Exactly. That's that becomes a lot more apparent, I think, for sure, as we age. And I know
that's also another reason why you have to be honest with your guides when they ask you medical questions. You know,
Oh,
they
absolutely.
because you get that questionnaire. You're like, do you have any of these conditions? Check, yes or no. And you're just going to go, nope, straight down the line. Maybe knowing that you do have one or two of those or something like that. It's like they're not doing that. Maybe they are just out of liability. But there's a time in some of those trips where they need to know that because you're going to be in these very dangerous conditions where your heart or your lungs, if there are any underlying conditions, that's a huge deal.
You have to be honest about that stuff because not only, and as we know for mountains like Denali, much like Rainier, the big similarity there is you're roped up. You're on a line of 3 people, and we need to know A, you have the skills, and B, if there is an underlying health issue, be honest about it so that we know why, what's behind the fact, what if you faint or what if this happens? Like we need to know what could potentially happen. So we're hopeful that most people are honest about that, and that if symptoms do show up, hopefully they show up early so that the person can be attended to, not on the summit.
I went with a guide up the Mountaineers route for Mount Whitney, and he said that we were easy clients, my husband and I. So we just had a lot of time to chat. And we were asking him about clients that he's had in the past. And we're like, do you have any stories? And he mentioned like, some people think that we won't find out about their underlying conditions when they lie on the medical questionnaire. And he's like, we will find out. And it turns out to be costly because they have to call in like a rescue helicopter or something like that. It's a very, very big deal. So, and it's also like self-reflective. If you're answering those questions and you find yourself saying, I do have this, I do have that, like maybe there's another mountain that's better suited for you.
Absolutely. It's funny when you bring that up too. It made me remember that one of the things that you would want to do if you were going to take on Denali is you definitely want to buy specific travel insurance for that trip, which would include a rescue helicopter. And honestly, these insurance packages, they're like $200 or maybe $500 if you choose extra options. But that, I remember paying $200 on my first Denali trip for that protection, knowing that if a rescue had to happen via helicopter, like that was the easiest $200 peace of mind I'd ever spent. I bet. To have that, because otherwise you'd be paying out of pocket up of $25,000 if you were actually rescued.
It's like the equivalent of not having medical insurance and then you get in an accident.
Yes, right, exactly. Yeah. And speaking of medical, I know that for this second trip, and probably the first, I can't remember, but definitely this trip, I had to get a doctor's physical and a note from the doctor certifying. And of course I was more than happy to do that. Mm-hmm. And just about any PCP is going to offer a physical that is like included with your insurance and should be. But yeah. And I thought it was super smart of Alaska Mountaineering School to have that, to have an actual doctor's signature, making sure you're okay and listing everything. So it's a big deal.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So you're a cyclist.
I am a recreational cyclist at this point in my life, but I had the honor of being a professional cyclist in road racing for about a decade.
So how did that happen? I thought you were a figure skater when you were young.
Well, I'll give you the quick timeline is I had been a figure skater when I was younger. And which is, skating is something that a lot of kids do in the Northeast, maybe not figure skating, but something skating, because there are a lot of ice rinks around there. And when I came out to graduate school, I'll step back. When I was in college, I was a rower. My father was a rower. So I was a skater and a rower. Then I came out to grad school in Tucson, and there is neither ice nor water anywhere in this state.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine said, get a bike. It's the same muscle groups as rowing and skating. And I was like, okay. So got a bike, and I first joined the triathlon club that any student could join, grad or undergrad, at University of Arizona. and I did okay in that. And I was able to work my way up through the ranks and get a professional license in triathlon, which I did for a few years. But it became very apparent that my strongest discipline within triathlon was on the bike. And I was also a journalist then. By the time I graduated from grad school, I worked for ESPN, and I got a life-changing assignment in 2006, which was ESPN said, hey, we're curious about what it takes in this modern day and age to become an Olympian, and we want to put you on a story. And I thought, oh, fantastic. Who am I interviewing? I can't wait. I love Olympians. And they said, oh, no, you're the guinea pig. You're going to try to get to the Olympics in 2 years.
No way.
Yep.
That is so cool.
This was a 2-year online column, and then it became a book called As Good as Gold. And it was about the journey of what does it take to actually become an Olympian. And long story short, I chose, in air quotes, I chose trying road cycling to be the medium of can I get to the games and what does it take, and brought the audience along on this journey for. By the time I found cycling, because I tried some other sports first, but by the time I found cycling, I had about a year to try to qualify for the Olympics. Wow. And spoiler alert, but also very good news, I didn't make it to the games, which goes to show that no, you can't just pick up a bike and in a year become an Olympic cyclist. I mean, it's very hard to become an Olympian, and I think that's a beautiful thing that this journey uncovered. Here's the crazy part. I came very close to qualifying for the games.
Wow.
And when the assignment was finished, that's when I thought, maybe I'm okay at this sport of road cycling. Maybe I could actually be a professional cyclist. So after the assignment, and at the end of that assignment, of course, went all the funding that comes from having ESPN cover everything for 2 years. Now I'm living a normal life with a normal job. Well, I'm a journalist, but I had to have subsequent side careers, as most journalists and writers do. But I had this dream of, I want to get to the professional level of road cycling. I think I have what it takes to get there. And I also admire all the women around me who have been at that level and are at that level. So I'm now going to condense the story for you that in 2012, at the age of 37, I got my first professional road cycling contract. Wow. And I raced for the next 5 years at the Pro Continental and World Tour level. And during that time, I noticed the inequities in women's cycling, that we weren't allowed to the same events as the men. Namely, and most importantly, women were not allowed at the Tour de France. Yet I've uncovered that women had been there in the 80s. What happened? Where did they go? Why can't we race now? And started a pressure group, an activism group of other women who were on the top levels of cycling and myself, and we lobbied for women's re-inclusion at the Tour de France, and we got it in 2014. And along the way of making this happen, I made a documentary film called Half the Road. It's out there. You can find it on iTunes, Vimeo, and it travels around the circuit of Amazon Prime. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not, but you can find it on iTunes. And Half the Road tells the story about what it's like to be a professional cyclist. And it's not my story. It's like the story of all the women. And then I got to stand on the start line of La Course by Tour de France at the age of 39 on the Champs-Élysées in France, and I got to race it. So that was really exciting for me to be part of that movement, of that generation. Back then, in the very beginning, the Tour de France, they only allowed the women to race one day. And then after 8 years, they finally made it into a stage race. It's now 9 days, but it's still 2/3 fewer days than the men's race. So we are still fighting the equality battle. But that was my journey, in pro cycling. I retired from the sport in 2017 and loved every journey. Loved everything related to it. I did write a book called Stand, about what it really took behind the scenes to make a women's Tour de France happen, and all the professional and personal prices paid along the way. So it gets into the nitty gritty of vulnerability and humanity, but also some bike racing.
Yeah.
And, retiring from that sport and then kind of stepping into a different career life after that, I brought all the athleticism still. I needed to find a way to, where do I channel the drive that comes from that? And hiking really became something that I just loved, adding into the routine, but without a goal of like, I have not a fastest known time
Mm-hmm.
or anything like that, but just being in nature and remembering like, hey, there's so much more out here than going as fast as you can in the sport. And so, now I, now in addition to training for Denali, but not so much in addition, but, I love riding my bike for fun and fitness.
Yeah.
I'll run, but for me, running is more jogging pace. And
Yeah.
hiking, yoga, swimming, just stuff that moves my body in different ways. So that's a little bit about my
That's
journey
amazing.
of all things physical.
That's amazing. And Tucson is a cycling hub, isn't it?
It is, and it's not only where I found cycling, but what's kept me out here is the sense of community that sport has built. And I think that Tucson is just a really great little city for community-oriented events as well. But
Mm-hmm.
it's awesome out here. I can't tell you how many, not just professional cyclists, but just age group cyclists will come and train here. So you will span the gamut from, 65-year-old retiree cyclists out here to have fun and fitness, and World Tour and Tour de France and Olympic racers that are calling us a training base during, half the year. So it's a great place to be, and clearly why I stayed. I thought I was coming out here for 2 years of grad school, and it's been 25 years.
That's amazing. Wow. I just bought a mountain bike.
Yay!
I have so much fun. And, I have my exercise routine every day. And it's like, I run, lift
Let's hear
some
it.
weights, do that. It's nothing. I do the same things I did in the Army. I just do it at my own pace now.
Yeah.
But what I look forward to every week is on Fridays, I go to the local state park not far from where we live, and they have like 20 miles of mountain biking trails. I stay on the beginner intermediate, but it's just a different way to experience the trails. And
Yes.
I look forward to that every day. So I mountain bike, and then I will paddleboard right after that. And it's what I look forward to every week.
Oh, that's awesome. I love it. That's so great. Yeah.
But I have immense respect for the cyclists that clip in, because I don't know how you guys do it. I would fall. I'd be so scared of falling.
Everybody feels that way in the beginning, but you just have to practice it a handful of times, like less than 10 times on clipless pedals, and you'll feel like a pro. You really will.
Wow.
I promise. We can work on that when you come visit Arizona. How about that?
Yes. I like to finish every episode by asking guests the same question. How has high pointing and the outdoors, and cycling in your case, enriched your life?
I can't imagine my life without the outdoors. I think it's not just enriched my life, but it is who I am to be able to go outside and be outside, and that's where I feel like my best self. So high pointing specifically has enriched my life by reminding me what an amazing thing it is to have a community that also loves being outdoors and finding their happy place and checking the boxes and visiting remote and interesting areas. Like, that just gives me so much joy, and it's made my life better. And then, as you know, we talked about, doing this journey with my dad, both in life and posthumously, and the journey through healing, through grief, and in the most healing way. This High Point journey has done so much for me as a human being, and given me so much light and love and joy. So that's a long answer, but I can't even begin to tell you that being outside has enriched me so much and throughout my whole life.
And do you have any books, documentaries, or outdoor-related podcasts that you want to recommend to listeners, including your own books?
Great question. Let's see. So I feel weird plugging my own books, but
You shouldn't.
it feels like, oh yeah, you have to read this. But if depending on how you like to buy books, whether it's online through Amazon or independent bookstores, I think the easiest thing that you can do for how you choose to read, whether it's print, digital, audiobook, if you head to my website, kathrynbertine.com. You'll get links to all of those there. If you want to go for the most recent book, Stand, which talks about the women and the Tour de France and the fight for activism, that is now on Spotify. They came into the picture and had me record the book a couple of years ago, so that's fun. Again, you can find all these on my website, or you can Google Kathryn Bertine author, and they'll pop up. Let's see, for podcasts, aside from yours, Lauren, because yours is my favorite, I have two that I like a lot, and they're not necessarily geared at all around cycling, but they're started by two different women in cycling who really get such amazing guests and dive into all things, not just athletic, but really the personal stories of what brings us to sport. Amber Pierce has a podcast called Be a Good Wheel. And Rebecca Rush, an amazing mountaineer and also cyclist. What's the Rush? Rebecca Rush, check out her podcast as well. Gosh, there are so many, but I'll leave you with those two for now. Yep.
Perfect. And I'll provide links for everything that you mentioned in the show notes. And then are there any initiatives that you want listeners to check out that you're involved in?
Sure. I always love to tell people about Homestretch Foundation, which is out here in Tucson, and it's the nonprofit that I helped create and also work for. And what we do is we help combat the gender pay gap that still exists in women's professional sports. And we fight the powers that be behind the scenes to equalize the pay gap. And we also provide a residence here in Tucson where female athletes who are at the professional level can apply to come to live and train for up to 6 months, housing free, rent free, everything free, while they get to the highest level in their sport. We've had 7 Olympians through our program, 104 athletes from 18 different countries, and it's really helping. And we've made significant strides in the pay gap. And that is homestretchfoundation.org. So Perfect. Feel free to check that out, and feel free to support it or drop me a note. And that is, it gives me a lot of joy.
Great. And I'll provide that link in the show notes as well. Well, Kathryn, this has been so much fun, and best of luck in Denali, and I cannot wait to hear about it when you come back for part 2 of this episode. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Lauren. You have a great podcast going here, and I'm excited to come back and tell you about Denali trips 1 and 2 and our hopeful summit days, but at the very least, our journeys on this mountain.
That's perfect. Well, thanks for everything you do.
Thank you, too. I appreciate you, Lauren.